This video lecture is an extension of the in-class lecture given in Economics 53 about employment and unemployment. In this short lecture, we talk about some of the traditional causes of unemployment. We talk about a controversy called the Phillips curve controversy, and we end with a brief discussion of some remedies for unemployment. When we consider textbook unemployment theory, they're primarily broken down into these three causes here. We'll discuss each one individually. First, there's frictional unemployment, which presumes that there's going to be some level of non-zero unemployment, some level of 0.5%, 1 or 1.5%, or even higher, because of information inefficiencies, which means essentially matching up people who need jobs with companies who want to hire. And it's a search and discover process that takes time. Once you are fired from a job or quit, you can't necessarily instantly find a replacement job, even though there's one out there. And this would imply, therefore, that the unemployment rate will be above zero simply because it takes a while, even if you have qualifications, and even if there's a job for you, to actually find the job. So that class of unemployment is called frictional unemployment. Structural unemployment refers to a changing condition in an economy that's much more serious. It involves a mismatch between skill levels needed and those that are available in a changing economy. For example, during my lifetime, and even to some extent during your lifetime, the demand for low-skilled labor jobs gradually disappears because of automation, whereas the jobs for certain categories of computer programmers and the like continues to rise because that's where the demand is. This is the kind of unemployment that can be caused by an educational system or a national training apparatus that is unsuited for changing the skills of the labor force as the demands for those skills change over time. And this can produce chronic unemployment for certain age cohorts that can be very long-lasting and independent of the business cycle. Finally, we know perfectly well that temporary unemployment is simply due to the business cycle, as is indicated by this graph that comes from a chart from a lecture that is delivered in the class. When the economy begins to slip in a business cycle and moves into a recession, there are obviously layoffs and a number of people are unemployed until such time as there is a recovery. That's very clear in the data, and that's discussed more in the actual lecture. This can add as much as 5% or more to an underlying unemployment rate. Next, we'll talk about a controversy called the Phillips curve controversy that has been in the textbooks for a very long time. When I was an undergraduate, this was discussed. And maybe it's disappearing now, but because it's kind of an interesting controversy, I retained it in this class. As this graph indicates, it was suggested by the original author, W.H. Phillips, in a study published in 1958, that there's a trade-off between inflation rates and unemployment rates. And our aggregate supply, aggregate demand model might suggest that this is true. The argument goes, based upon data that he reviewed, that when the inflation rate comes down, if you have to pull it down, that's going to raise the unemployment rate. Now, this has since then been hotly contested, with the argument being there's no necessary real correlation between the two. When you take a look at modern data, and this is data that simply shows the plot of inflation rates and unemployment rates over the last 48 years, if you simply look at that data, there's no obvious correlation between the two. If you're going to run a fit through here, it's not going to be a very good fit. I think this leads most modern economists like me to conclude that although this relationship may have once existed, it no longer does. In the United States, trends in the employment rate and the unemployment rate tend to be dictated more by demographics and the aging of the U.S. population than anything else. That's why in the current recession and the tepid recovery we've had since then, the unemployment rate nationally has come down below 5%, even though the economy's recovery has not been very strong. We have a very large percentage of the labor force each year moving into retirement, and that partly explains it. When we get to a discussion of the solutions for high unemployment rates, your teacher believes that education tools and a flexible education can go a long way towards solving at least the structural unemployment that we talked about earlier in this video presentation. When you take a look at the way unemployment is treated in countries like Germany or in some of the Northern European countries like Finland, you can see that they have apprenticeship programs or training programs that are designed to match the skills of the emerging labor force with what is demanded by the economy. I think our educational setup in the United States is very rigid, hasn't really been changed much, is oriented toward test taking, which doesn't really solve any problems here, and really needs to be restructured. You also know that I'm interested as an individual in efficiency in education. I teach these courses in an economically efficient way, allowing larger enrollments than is typical for Harvey Mudd College, simply to see if you can get the cost of teaching down a little bit when you embody videos like this and other more innovative teaching techniques to reach out to larger numbers of students. And I think this is especially necessary in STEMS education. With regard to the first classification of unemployment that is caused by misinformation, then clearly better information flows, which is made possible on social media and some of the online job sites, can help in that department. And of course, finally, for those still swept up by unemployment, despite any remedies we might offer, unemployment compensation and fairly generous unemployment compensation is sometimes the only short-term remedy that can really work.